Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to our third webinar on litigation series. Thank you for joining in such large numbers. So, as you are all aware that we have already had two webinars in this series. First one we had in the month of June, and the second webinar we had in the month of July. Now, this is our third and the last webinar in this series. So, the topics that we seek to cover today are advanced rulings, concurrent jurisdiction, repeal and savings, audit seizure attachment. These four topics I will be covering, and I am joined with my colleague Ayush Agarwal, who will cover the topics show cause notices, appeal and recovery, and general penalty. And towards the end, we will take up live question and answer round. So we start with the advanced rulings. Now, advanced rulings, as we are all aware, because this is not new, we have had this even under the erstwhile service tax excise regime, as well as even in some form and shape under the VAT laws. So for any proposed activity, advanced ruling can be sought on determination of various questions. Likewise, under GST also, advanced ruling has been prescribed under section 97, and one can seek advanced ruling for seeking classification of goods or services, for knowing or determining about the applicability of notification, for determining time and value of supply, for determining whether or not input tax credit would be available, for determining the liability to pay tax on goods or services, whether or not registration is mandatory or is required under the GST laws, and also to determine whether a particular activity amounts to supply of goods or services or both or none. So we come to some of the disputes that have arisen on this account. Now, first one is a Maharashtra advanced ruling. So we are not going into the disputes relating to these topics, but more to do with the advanced ruling provisions per se. So this particular ruling before Maharashtra Advanced Ruling Authority, the applicant here had acquired some capital goods, both domestic as well as imported capital goods, on which they had discharged excise duty, CVD and SAD. Now the issue was whether at the relevant time before in the pre-GST regime, their output was exempt, so they were not able to avail SENVAT credit. However, in post-GST regime, their output became taxable. So they applied for this ruling seeking whether they can transition the credit of excise duty and CVD, SAD that they paid on procurement of these capital goods into the GST regime. The authority denied their application, declined to entertain, saying that ITC has been defined under the GST law as input tax on GST, and transitional credit pertains to earlier period, and therefore which is not akin to ITC. Therefore, the application is not maintainable, as this question cannot be raised before the AAR. Second ruling is Sutherland Mortgage. Now, what had happened in this case is that the Sutherland Mortgage wanted to seek advanced ruling to know whether their activity amounts to export and is therefore zero rated. Now, one of the ingredients for determination of zero rated supplies, as we are aware under section 16, is that the place of supply should be outside India. Now, when we see 97 different categories under which the advanced ruling can be sought, place of supply is not directly mentioned. So the advanced ruling authority declined to entertain the application. Accordingly, Sutherland challenged this advanced ruling before Kerala High Court, and Kerala High Court held that the expression determination of liability to pay tax is a very wide connotation. It encompasses issues relating to place of supply, and therefore the approach of advanced ruling authority was not correct. They remanded the matter back to advanced ruling authority to consider the law and then give their ruling accordingly. Next, we see that there is section 98. Now 98, what it does is that it allows the authority not to admit applications where the question that has been raised by the applicant is either already pending or has already been decided in any proceedings in the case of applicant. Now, what is important here is in the case of applicant. So whether the proceedings are pending in the case of applicant or decided in the case of applicant is of utmost importance. Now, there are cases in this regard. So Hindustan Coca-Cola approached Karnataka Advanced Ruling Authority seeking classification of a beverage, Fanta Fruity Orange. Now, on this very aspect, Fanta Fruity Orange classification, Gujarat authority had already ruled. So an advanced ruling had already been sought by Hindustan Coca-Cola before Gujarat authority. So because of that, the Karnataka authority refused to entertain by saying that the application is not maintainable because the question has already been decided by Gujarat authority. And now in our view, this is not correct, because under GST law, each state there is a separate registration. The PAN could be common, permanent account number could be common, but these are called distinct persons. Now, if a distinct person in Gujarat having a separate registration has sought a ruling from Gujarat authority, that does not mean that the Karnataka authority is debarred or is restricted, that they cannot pass any ruling. Because Karnataka, there is a separate registration of Hindustan Coca-Cola, they can certainly sought this advance ruling and authority could not have refused. Second, this also is completely illegal because there is a provision under the advance ruling provisions that there is a national authority. Now, national authority hears matters which come when there are two appellate authorities under two states which rule contrary in the case of distinct persons. So assume that if Karnataka authority in this case would have given a ruling which was contrary to a ruling given in Gujarat by the Gujarat authority, and if these matters go to appellate authority and appellate authority also maintains those contrary views, then such disputed issues go to national tribunal. Now, if the authority below will refuse to entertain the application by saying that since Gujarat authority has already ruled, therefore Karnataka, we do not have jurisdiction, the application is not maintainable, then the very jurisdiction of national authority we are challenging, and therefore this ruling is absolutely incorrect. Likewise, in case of Vikram Traders, what had happened was that Vikram Traders was applied for a ruling seeking that whether or not they are eligible to input tax credit on inputs and input services that would be consumed in the construction of immobile property which they were proposing to construct, and that immobile property was meant for renting out. So they said that please give us this ruling, but the Karnataka authority declined to intervene, saying that Safari Retreat matter is pending before Supreme Court. Now, what happened in Safari Retreat is that High Court of Orissa held that in the Safari Retreat wanted to construct a building for again renting out and for business purpose, and they allowed the ITC. So there is a section 17(5) which restricts ITC on inputs and input services used in construction of immobile property. But in Safari Retreat, High Court read down 17(5)(c) and 17(5)(d) and said that ITC would be available because the ultimate activity is furtherance of business, and therefore all this consumption is towards in the course and furtherance of business, and they allowed ITC. This matter is pending before Supreme Court. Vikram Traders had nothing to do. They were not the applicants. It was not their case. Yet Karnataka authority wrongly declined to intervene or entertain the advance ruling application. Again, in the case of Saint Gobain, this is a Maharashtra advance ruling. What they were doing, they sought classification of a product which they proposed to manufacture. What advance ruling authority said is that since supplies have not yet been started and manufacturing itself is yet to be undertaken, and no sample of the product has been placed on record, therefore this application is not maintainable. This is again in our view not a correct ruling, because law clearly provides that for a proposed activity, advance ruling can be sought. Obviously, once the manufacturing takes place, the product will be traded, it will be sold, and supply will take place. Authority could not have declined this the application. Also, the law nowhere prescribes that provision of sample should be there, and only then the authority will rule on classification. So the approach of authority was completely erroneous. We come to the next topic, which is concurrent jurisdiction. Now, this is very important and pertinent. Why is it so? That earlier, as we are aware, there were separate, distinct administrations. Central had separate administration, and state VAT and everything was controlled by the state VAT authorities. Therefore, when GST came, issue came up, how will the power be exercised? Now, while the assessees were administratively bifurcated or divided between central and state, but what happens is, suppose if there is an intra-state supply, you have both central and state taxes that are applicable. Now, if for assessment, if both the authorities were to pass orders, there will be chaotic situation. There can be contrary orders. There will be multiplicity of proceedings, and therefore that was not a desirable objective. Therefore, under Rule 6, under Section 6 of CGST Act, what law was prescribed is that authorities under state or UT GST were made as proper officers for CGST purpose. Likewise, under the state laws and UT laws, Union Territory laws, under Section 6, the respective CGST authorities were appointed as proper officers. So first and foremost, this activity was done. So now single order can be passed by one of the authorities, and which will be passed not only for that particular, whether if a central officer is passing, that will apply not only for CGST but also for SGST and UTGST. Likewise for state. Also, Section 6 included one more provision, that so that to avoid or mitigate multiplicity, that if a particular authority initiates a proceeding, then the other authority should not initiate or should not initiate any proceeding on the same issue, same aspect. This also has given rise to multiple disputes. So in the case of Ravi Agarwal, what had happened is that Ravi Agarwal, this is a Chhattisgarh High Court judgment. So they had a business, their registration was in the state of Chhattisgarh, and they had business everywhere. Now, what happened is that they received certain investigation summons from Director General of GST Intelligence, which was earlier Central DGCEI, Director General of Central Excise Intelligence, which is now nomenclated as DGGI. So they received certain summons for investigation by from DGGI from some other state. So they challenged, they said that we are registered only in Chhattisgarh, why other authorities are investigating us? Court held that on this particular aspect, court ruled that no, DGGI has pan-India jurisdiction, they have power to inquire and investigate the matters. Also, they said that apart from DGGI, other authorities, whether under central or state act, they have their territorial jurisdiction only. But if within their territory, if there is any offense committed and they come to that offense, then definitely they can rule in such matters. Then this matter further went in review, and again this Ravi Agarwal again challenged that whether they can, if multiple proceedings are there, then court held that in case there are multiple proceedings, then taxpayer can always inform the officer who has initiated subsequent proceedings regarding the already pending proceedings. So this matter accordingly got resolved. Now, in the case of Suresh Bhai Gadecha, this Anmol Traders Gujarat High Court matter, what had happened that CGST authorities conducted search and seizure proceedings on this petitioner, and because this petitioner was under the administrative control of state tax, so the state tax authorities issued summons asking him why the central authorities conducted search, what documents or goods they seized, what statements they have recorded. So for this purpose, the state authorities kept on issuing summons. Now, when this petitioner approached Gujarat High Court held that intention is to detect possible transgression, but that does not mean that multiple authorities can investigate the matter. When CGST authorities are seized with the matter, then state authorities, knowing fully well, are again asking the same question, which is not tenable, and therefore Gujarat High Court issued notices to state authorities and also stayed the proceedings before state authorities. However, in the case of Dadichi Iron, this is a very interesting case. What happened here is that there was a show cause notice issued by state authorities, and state authorities in that show cause notice raised a demand for 11 crore rupees on the ground that this dealer, Dadichi Iron, was availing ITC based on fake invoices. There was no supply of goods, etc., but only fake invoices were there, bogus invoices, based on which Dadichi Iron was availing ITC to the tune of 11 crore, and that tax demand show cause notice was already in place. Subsequent thereto, DGGI conducted search, seized documents, records, and goods, etc., issued summons, arrested the director, and the ground they had taken is that there is a ITC evasion of 60 crore, input tax credit evasion of 60 crore based on fake invoices. Okay, and those fake invoices, again, the input side also there were fake invoices, and on output also they sold goods without supplying any goods. So there were sale invoices, but no goods were supplied. On this point, again, Dadichi Iron approached Chhattisgarh High Court, stating that they are already in receipt of a show cause notice from state authorities, and therefore DGGI proceedings are not tenable in terms of Section 62B. Now, the High Court, unfortunately, in this case, ruled as if there is no overlapping of jurisdiction, or there are no parallel proceedings by state tax authorities and DGGI. Investigation proceedings by DGGI are based on specific information relating to availment of ITC based on fake invoices, and therefore their case of 60 crore is different from the state authorities case, which is restricted only to 11 crore demand. In our view, it is not the amount of quantification of demand which is relevant. The point is that if on the same fake invoices, same transaction, if two authorities are going to investigate, then that is not permissible under the law, and it is violative of concurrent jurisdiction 62B. And therefore, to this extent, we feel that the Chhattisgarh High Court, this judgment is not correct. So next we come to our third topic, which is repeal and savings. Now, as we are aware that GST law was enacted by subsuming erstwhile laws, Finance Act 1994, be it central excise, state VAT laws, various entry tax and entertainment taxes, and so on and so forth. And those erstwhile laws were repealed. So Section 173 amended section chapter 5 of Finance Act 1994. So service tax was enacted through chapter 5 of Finance Act 1994. Now section 173 of CGST amended that chapter 5 by deleting it from the Finance Act 1994. Likewise, Excise Act was repealed. And we are also aware that General Clauses Act section 6 and 6A provide for specific cases where they say that if during the pendency of any particular levy, any particular law, if any action is done, then whatever rights, etc., that arise, or any obligation or liabilities that arise, would continue unless there is a different intention. So question was, is there a different intention under the GST law, whether to continue the old proceedings under the erstwhile laws or not? In this regard, section 174 of CGST Act clearly provided that yes, proceedings under the erstwhile laws will be saved and can continue. So it saved rights, privileges, obligations, and liabilities acquired or incurred under the repealed laws. Also, it saved investigation, inquiry, and verification, including scrutiny and audit, whether they are already instituted or yet to be instituted, continued or enforced under the repealed act. Now, again, this led to, because as we are aware that effective 1st July 2017, old laws were not in place and GST replaced them. And therefore, till date, as we see that the old the proceedings under the old laws are continuing, whether by way of audit, whether by way of show cause notices, etc. And therefore, this gave rise to multiplicity of these writs that went to different courts. Now, in these matters, Gujarat High Court in OWS, Delhi High Court in Vianar, and TR Sahni, what they held, and all these three cases were relating to audit under Rule 5A. So, court came to a prima facie view that what is saved by section 174(2)(e) is only the act and not the subordinate legislation, which is the service tax rule 5A, which provide for audit. And therefore, to this extent, court was of the prima facie view that the audit cannot be continued. So court not only issued notices. In the case of OWS and TR Sahni, they stayed the proceedings, audit proceedings, but in Vianar, they refused to grant any stay. In our view, these stay, etc., these are not maintainable, these are not tenable, because as we will see in the subsequent cases that we will discuss in a while, shortly, courts have given a contrary view and final view, saying that if that act itself is saved and institution has of proceedings has been saved, that means that even the subordinate legislation of that act is equally saved, because they only provide for the machinery provisions. So those are also saved. Also, what happened was that, especially in case of state laws, state VAT laws, they sought to amend their law. So if there are any amendment is there, so okay, so all the VAT laws arise from entry 54 of list 2 of the constitution, 7th schedule to the constitution, and therefore state legislatures enacted their respective VAT laws deriving power from that entry 54. Now, effective 1st July 2017, that entry 54 itself was deleted from the list 2 of the 7th schedule of the constitution, and therefore state authorities were not competent anymore to enact. State legislatures could not enact or made any amendments to the VAT laws. So any amendment which was made prior to 1st July 2017 was valid, but after July 1, 2017, if any amendments were made, those were held to be invalid because state legislature had no competence. Now, what in these three cases, which were before, two were Baiju and Aldo before Kerala High Court and Reliance before Gujarat High Court, what the state legislatures sought to do, they brought in amendment acts somewhere in 2018 or 2019, seeking to revive the time limits for doing assessments, reassessments, and review and revisions. And for that matter, they wanted to reopen all those assessments of as old as 2011, 12, and all those assessments. These matters went to travel to the High Court, and High Court held clearly that post repeal, the savings clause cannot make good any amendment which is done after the repealing of the act. The state legislature has no power, and no such executive action can be said to be legal, and therefore these amendments were struck down by the courts. Now coming to the point that I was making, that in the case of Matrika, this is MP High Court, then Argus Delhi High Court, Lakshmi Narayan Guwahati High Court, and Geetanjali Calcutta High Court. All four cases, the courts held that Section 174 does not give any contrary intention as indicated under Section 6 of General Clauses Act. Rather, it saves all the actions, and therefore authorities are competent to continue investigation, inquiry, audit, and also institute fresh inquiry, investigation, or audit under the erstwhile laws. And therefore, revenue was allowed to continue with audit, issuance of show cause notice, etc., even after 1st July 2017, whether continuing from earlier period or instituted fresh. Everything was allowed. And therefore, to this extent, the earlier three notices that were issued by Delhi and Kerala High Court uh, uh, are not tenable. They will not survive. We come to the next topic, which is audit, seizure, and attachment. Now, as we know, in GST, another aspect is that while audit, inquiry, investigation, search, seizure, these are all have been there in the past under the erstwhile regime also. But the unique feature of GST is that it has combined some aspects from VAT laws, some aspects from excise, some from service tax, and some from customs. And therefore, what we have under GST is a mix of multiple powers that have been granted to the authorities while the objective is to prevent evasion of tax, which is a noble objective, but the implementation of that is not happening in letter and spirit, and therefore there are a lot of disputes that are arising, which we are just going to discuss. So section 213 defines audit to mean examination of any records, returns, etc., documents maintained or furnished by a registered person. Because as we are aware, GST is complete on a self assessment basis, and therefore audit is a way to check whether the whatever has been declared under self assessment is correct or not, and therefore these audits have been prescribed. Likewise, to verify the correctness of whatever turnover has been declared, taxes paid, refund claimed, ITC availed, etc. There are three types of audits that are prescribed. One is the annual audit. So we file the monthly or the quarterly return, as the case may be. Once the return is filed, then at the end of the year, there is an annual provision for annual audit, wherein a reconciliation with the audited financials and the returns filed over the year, those are matched, and whatever reconciliation is required, that needs to be furnished. Then we have the audit by the proper officer, which, as I mentioned, they scrutinize and they check whether there is correct declaration, whether there is any escapement or anything. So they check all this by auditing the accounts, etc. Last one is a special audit, which has been prescribed in cases which are very technical and require help of an expert. So for this, at the directions of the officers, the assessees may be required to get their records audited from nominated experts who are chartered accountants or cost accountants. Now these experts have to submit their report within 90 days, and pursuant thereto, the authorities grant personal hearing, and then they pass on their orders or findings of the audit. So another provision is section 67. 67 provides for inspection, search, and seizure. Now this power has been given to an officer not below the rank of joint commissioner. So an officer not below the rank of joint commissioner who has reason to believe that there is any suppression of transaction or stock of goods, or there has been excess availment of ITC or excess refund claim, or ITC has been claimed based on fake invoices, or that accounts are maintained in a manner which is likely to cause evasion, or there is an escapement of tax, or transactions have been undertaken by a taxpayer without any supporting evaluable. Then in all such cases, if he has reason to believe, he can authorize a officer not below joint commissioner can authorize a subordinate officer to go and inspect the place of business. Now, whether based on this inspection or the authority, the joint commissioner himself has reason to believe that there are any goods or any documents, books, or things which are useful for any proceedings and which are secreted any place of business or any residence or any place, then such joint commissioner can further issue authorize and issue a search warrant authorizing a subordinate officer to search the premises and seize those goods, books of accounts, etc. So those proceedings are also possible. Now these are very vast and very powers are immense, and whether they are utilized correctly or not, we will see there have been several jurisprudence around this. So for the taxpayer, it is important that as and when any officer visits, they must ensure that what is the identity of the officer before he enters the premises, whether he is carrying a search warrant which is in form INS-01, whether there are two independent witnesses who are accompanying the officer. Typically, these witnesses need to be from the same locality. But if the witnesses from the locality are not available, they can be from some other locality also. The officer, whether or not he recovers anything, seizes anything, but has to necessarily prepare a panchnama on which the independent witnesses, the person who has been whose premises has been searched, and the officer himself, they have to sign. Then in case he seizes anything, then he must pass a seizure order. He must issue a seizure order in form INS-02 then and there, and copies of seizure order and panchnama need to be given to the person whose premises have been searched. Also, section 67 provides that taxpayer has a right to take photocopies of seized documents. Now, typically, these copies are not provided on the spot. Rather, taxpayer is asked to make an application. And even when he makes an application, typically the office authorities deny by saying that, you know, taxpayer can tamper with the witnesses or can manipulate these documents, and therefore they will not be provided. But this is this cannot be an excuse to not to provide documents. Now, this section 67, because there is a seizure prescribed, it also provides for release of goods on provisional basis. In case of perishable goods, the provisional release is a mandatory kind of a thing. And also, because in case of seizure, the authorities must issue show cause notice within a period of 6 months from seizure. If they do not issue show cause notice within 6 months, then the goods need to be returned to the person from whose possession they have been seized. This 6-month period can further be extended by another 6 months. Again, section 67 only provides for seizure of documents and goods. It does not provide for arrest of the person who has been searched. Also, no statements can be recorded under section 67. So certain case laws have arisen from this. First, in this regard is the Golden Cotton judgment, where, because as we saw that, you know, any authorization for inspection or authorization for searching the premises, there has to be reason to believe that the officer not below the rank of Joint Commissioner must possess. And therefore, this aspect, what is reason to believe, was examined. Now, there is a vast jurisprudence on this subject under the income tax laws. But this was under GST law for the first time this ruling came, and it said that reason to believe there should be a sufficient cause. So efficacy needs to be seen. It should be the belief that must be of an honest and reasonable man. It must be based on relevant material and circumstances and not on whims and caprices of the officer. And if reason to believe is challenged, then the proper officer must be able to disclose and prove that he possessed the reason to believe. Again, in the case of Mahendra Kumar Indermal and Prakash Singh Hathi Singh, now these are Andhra Pradesh High Court and Gujarat High Court. In these cases, what happened? There was no warrant, or there was no authorization from the Joint Commissioner. So in the case of Mahendra Kumar Indermal, the seizure memo, which was drawn by a deputy commissioner, did not mention who authorized him, what was the search warrant. No search warrant was there, and yet he seized the goods, and therefore Andhra Pradesh High Court held it is not legal. Likewise, in the case of Prakash Singh also, the assistant commissioner called the assessee for a statement, some investigation, and there he seized the car and mobile phone without having any authorization from Joint Commissioner. Now these matters, when they went to high courts held that since one, there is no authorization, there is no reason to believe recorded anywhere, and therefore absent this, the seizures are illegal, and the entire proceedings are not tenable. Again, this is another case, Bombay High Court. Here, the assessee filed a writ petition saying that the department is not providing him copies of seized documents which were taken from his custody. And authorities said that, as I mentioned, that the assessee will tamper with evidence, will manipulate. These are fake invoices. He will go and create evidences to this effect. High Court said nothing doing. The person is eligible for documents. He does not even need to provide any justification, and copies need to be provided to the person. In the case of Paresh Nathalal Chauhan, this is very interesting case. So the officers went for search. The search got concluded on day one. Now, when the search of residential premises was taking place, the petitioner Paresh Nathalal or the assessee was not there. Authorities' case was that this Paresh Nathalal was availing a huge ITC based on fake invoices and was again passing on this ITC to other people. And therefore, even after the search was completed, the authorities, the officers who were conducting search, continued to stay at the premises of residential premises of this petitioner for 7 more days. And in these 7 days, they restricted the family members, they recorded their statements, they recorded their phone calls, and tried to find out the whereabouts of Paresh Nathalal. And eventually, the matter traveled to Gujarat High Court, who completely took the authorities saying that all this is beyond law, what they have done. Only day one when they went for search was legal. Rest, it was not search for goods or things or documents, but search for person. They have no right to record a statement of family members or to find whereabouts of taxpayer by coercing family members. All this is illegal, and this is not saved even under section 157, which saves the act of a public officer in his official capacity. So such illegal acts are not saved anywhere. So this is Paresh Nathalal. We come to section 70, which is for summoning a person. So summons can be issued by a proper officer where they feel that the attendance of any person is necessary to give an evidence, to produce any documents or things which they feel are required for the purpose of inquiry or investigation. Now, in this regard, before GST law came in March 2017, government issued frequently asked questions, wherein while explaining the scope of section 70 as to what safeguards need to be taken and in what situations summons can be issued, these FAQs clearly stipulated that this should be the last resort, where taxpayer refuses to cooperate. So if an authority wants certain documents, etc., and taxpayer refuses to provide the documents or is not, even after repeated requests from the authorities, he does not make available such documents, then yes, he can be summoned, but not straight away. Also, top management should not be summoned at first instance. Unless some involvement is seen, they cannot be summoned. Also, the language of the summons should be very polite. It should not be harsh and legal. Again, they said that for issuing summons, there should be written authorization from the assistant commissioner. And lastly, the officer who is issuing summon and who has called a person for recording statement, etc., needs to submit a report, brief report of the purpose of summon and what happened, transpired during the investigation or the recording of a statement to his superiors. Now, question is, while all these precautions and safeguards are in place, but are they really followed in letter and spirit? Is far from truth. Section 69 provides for arrest of any person. Now, arrest provisions are very draconian, as we all know, because you are taking away liberty of a person. Therefore, only an officer of the rank of commissioner is allowed to authorize arrest of any person, and he should have reasons to believe that the person for whom he is passing such an order is supplying goods without invoices, or is engaged in fraudulent availment of ITC or fraudulent refund claims, or has issued invoices without supply of any goods or services, and has collected tax but has not deposited the same within 3 months. Now, even in such cases, and not in all cases, he can authorize arrest. He can authorize arrest only where the amount of tax which has been evaded is more than 2 crore. If the amount is between 2 crore and 5 crore, the offense is bailable, and the assistant commissioner and deputy commissioner are duly authorized under the law to grant bail. But if the offense involves tax evasion of more than 5 crore, it is a non-bailable offense. The person can be arrested and needs to be produced before the magistrate within 24 hours. In this regard, this is an important judgment, Akhil Krishnan Maggu, which is a Punjab Haryana High Court judgment. Now, what happened in this case is that this particular petitioner, he was earlier originally a CHA, Custom House Agent, and later became a lawyer. And he was charged by the authorities as if he has masterminded some racket whereby he is availing refund of ITC on fictitious exports. I mean, exports by fictitious firms. So, as if he is masterminding everything. And those fictitious firms he was representing before the tribunal also since 2017, etc. There were some disputes between the officers and this petitioner, because this petitioner, his father and his brother were arrested. They were kept behind bars. Their statements were recorded on multiple occasions, but there was nothing incriminating against them, any of them. Still, the authorities kept on, authorities not only filed multiple FIRs against him, saying that he's interfering in the official work of the officers. Also, he was summoned time and again, and therefore he approached the High Court that he's been harassed by officers for without having any evidence, and therefore he apprehends arrest, and therefore the summons should be quashed and he should not be arrested. High Court examined all the entire proceedings and said that arrest power should not be exercised at the whims and caprices or for sake of recovery. Arrest, they laid down certain criteria in what cases arrest can be done and in what cases it should not be done. And those criteria were that arrest should not be done where arrest can be done where the amount involved is huge. There is a huge evasion and there is no, the whereabouts of a person are not known. He is like fly by the night kind of a person. He has no fixed place of business or anything. When the person does not appear despite repeated summons, he is a habitual offender. He has been prosecuted or convicted earlier. He is likely to flee from the country. He is originator of fake invoices, and there is concrete evidence available against such a person. Then arrest is possible. But arrest should not be made in cases where a person is having established business or manufacturing unit or other things. He is regularly paying taxes, filing returns, etc. There is no direct evidence of his involvement in any evasion, etc. And there is, in such cases, first the liability should be determined, prosecution should be launched if it is required, only then some arrest should be made and not otherwise. Next, we come to whenever there is an apprehension for arrest or the person has already been arrested, what are the options? So in case of anticipation of arrest, he can apply for anticipatory bail or he can file a writ petition. In case he has already been arrested, he should apply for a regular bail. Now, in the case of Hanumathappa, what had happened is that he was anticipating that more than 5 crore rupees is involved. There is an investigation going on and he could be arrested. So he applied for anticipatory bail before the High Court, Karnataka High Court. Authorities said that he cannot get bail. The court held that there is no bar under the CGST law, under the GST laws, that a person cannot seek anticipatory bail under section 438 of Code of Criminal Procedure. and therefore he was granted bail. In the case of Nitin Nikhara, he was arrested, and the issue was that if the charge sheet was not filed within 60 days. Now what happens is that in case of an arrested person, section 167 of Code of Criminal Procedure requires that a charge sheet needs to be filed before the court of magistrate within 60 days of the arrest. If the charge sheet is not filed, then there is a default bail which is prescribed under the under section 167 of Code of Criminal Procedure. So in the case of Nitin Nikhara, even after passing of 60 days, charge sheet was not filed, and the authorities were not willing to let him go. So he filed this application before Madhya Pradesh High Court, and High Court held that after 60 days there is a right which has accrued to the petitioner for release on bail, and he was accordingly released on bail. Now, in the case of Sapna Jain, Bombay High Court granted Sapna Jain anticipatory bail under section 438 of Code of Criminal Procedure, and the charge was fraudulent availment of ITC. This matter, the Union of India went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court did not interfere with the pre-arrest bail granted by Bombay High Court, but Supreme Court observed that in the case of P.V. Ramanna Reddy, passed by Telangana High Court, wherein there was a huge fraud, ITC fraud committed to the tune of 1250 crore or so. Telangana High Court said in such cases, anticipatory bail should not be granted. That matter went in SLP to Supreme Court. Supreme Court refused to entertain that SLP. So in the case of Sapna Jain, while without interfering with the pre-arrest bail order, Supreme Court said that what they held in P.V. Ramanna Reddy case, that should be observed in such cases. And since there are divergent views of high courts in the matter of pre-arrest bail in such cases, therefore Supreme Court referred this matter to a larger bench, because there are serious fraud cases involved in such cases. The matter is still pending. Now we come to some guidelines. Now this is back in 1996. There was a public interest litigation, and in the case of D.K. Basu, Supreme Court laid down certain guidelines. Now those guidelines were essentially they have referred to police officer, but these guidelines are equally applicable to DRI, to DGCI, to Enforcement Directorate. These guidelines are, because these have been applied uniformly, these guidelines would be applicable even under GST law. What these guidelines are, these are essentially safeguards, so that the arrested person is not tortured, he is not harassed, he is not there are no custodial deaths, etc. So what this says is that police personnel must bear accurate, visible, clear identification and name tags. So likewise, officers should be identifiable: who is arresting, what is his designation, how he is doing, on what ground he is doing, does he have the authorization from the commissioner before arrest. Likewise, arrest memo must be signed by family member, local respectable person and arrestee, and record of date and time of arrest should be there. So this again is important even from GST perspective. Some close friend or relative should be informed about arrest. Here also under GST this should be done. Inspection memo should be prepared. Now this inspection memo is for the the physical checking of the person, whatever his personal belongings are, and also his appearance, his state of appearance at that minute, that at the time of arrest, whether he is having any injury marks. Because later, if there is an allegation that he has been tortured or some third degree has been adopted, then he can, this inspection memo will come to will help. So this inspection memo needs to be prepared. Likewise, copies of all documents, etc., which have been prepared by the arresting officer, and the arrest memo should be sent to the magistrate within 24 hours. And lastly, soon after arrest, there should be a medical examination, and thereafter, so long as the person is in the police custody, he should be medically examined every 48 hours. But once the person is sent to judicial custody by the magistrate, then he is not with the police under police custody, then this medical examination can be stopped. But so all these precautions which were guidelines which were laid by DK Basu, these guidelines in the case of DK Basu, these guidelines apply even for GST laws. Next we come to provisional attachment. This is a very important topic and a very frequently used tool with the authorities to recover their dues without even assessment. And this is the most abused provision in the recent times. So section 83 provides for issue of provisional attachment in cases where proceedings are pending, and proceedings should be pending under section 62, 63, 64, which are different assessments, and or section 67, which we discussed about in inspection, search and seizure, or under section 73 and 74. 73, 74 deal with recovery and demands. 73 for recovery where no fraud suppression is involved, and 74 where fraud suppression is involved. Now these topics 73, 74 will be dealt in greater detail by Ayush under demand recovery, etc. So I will not go into that, but for the purpose of section 83, the proceedings should be pending in under one of these provisions. Only then the 83 proceedings can be initiated. Second, the objective under section 83 provisional attachment is to protect interest of revenue, and there should be an order passed by commissioner in writing in form GST DRC 22. The validity of attachment is for 1 year. The remedy that is available, rule 159 deals with it. It says that assessee can file objections before commissioner within 7 days. Commissioner should grant personal hearing. After considering the objections, commissioner may reject or confirm attachment in form DRC 23. And if the taxpayer is not satisfied, he can file a writ. There is no appeal prescribed for provisional attachment. Now, in the case of cash impacts, what had happened, some summons were issued under section 70, and based on that, the provisional attachment proceedings were initiated. Likewise, in case of Canal Enterprises, which is Gujarat High Court, some authorization was given under section 71 to access certain premises, and based on that, the attachment order were passed. And section 70 and 71 proceedings are not contemplated under section 83. So the court held that these proceedings are bad in law, because attachment the proceedings ought to have been under 62, 63, 64, 67, 73 or 74. Section 70 and 71 are not stipulated, and therefore the attachment is not tenable. In the case of Pranit Hem Desai, what happened here was that Pathan Steel, court laid down certain guidelines that in what cases provisional attachment should not be justified. They held that if the situation is revenue neutral, then it should not be like the case. The ITC that was availed was in the case of Pranit was 59 crore, and their output tax liability which they paid by utilizing that ITC and in cash, etc., was 63 crore. They said if the entire ITC which you are claiming that they wrongly availed has been utilized and tax has been paid, then there is a revenue neutral situation. Likewise, in Pathan, also as against the demand of 13 lakh, 17 lakh was paid. So they said that if more amount has already been paid or ITC has been reversed or a revenue neutral situation, then there is no need for attachment. Again, in the case of Valerius, this is a very detailed judgment of Gujarat High Court, and Enprocon simply followed Valerius, but Valerius, they laid down detailed guidelines on two aspects. One were, in both these cases, these were attachment orders were passed by state authorities, and state authority also state tax officer. So what happened is that the commissioner of state tax, he delegated his powers under section 83 to deputy commissioner, assistant commissioner, and state tax officer. So first thing, court held that this delegation is not allowed. Section 83 does not permit such delegation, Commissioner himself has to issue an order, and therefore the order itself is not tenable. Second, they laid down under what cases such attachment can be done, and they said that it should not be on the subjective satisfaction, but the attachment order must be based on credible material and information and duly supported by supervening factors. It should be exercised very sparingly. Utmost care and circumspection should be taken while issuing such orders. Also, there should be reasonable apprehension that the assessee will not pay. This amount can never be recovered if it is not, the property is not attached provisionally. Also, if the revenue neutrality case or ITC reversal situation be there, then attachment should not be done. Also, the motive should not be to harass the person or ruin his business, because in a lot of cases the trading goods, the bank account, the various assets, etc., are seized, attached, and if these are attached, then how will the person survive? How will his business run? This is not in the interest of revenue. Interest of revenue is when the taxpayer is working, he is doing business, and he pays more revenue, rather than if his business itself comes to a complete halt and he is required to close his business. Then it should be used as a last resort and not the opening one. So first they should try other means. Also, what they had also held is that this kind of provisional attachment is not akin to recovery proceedings, because this is prior to assessment. After assessment, recovery is done, that is valid, but prior to assessment it is only a precautionary measure, and therefore must be exercised very diligently. So these are the guidelines that the Gujarat High Court laid, and need to be need to be observed by the authorities, but they are not being done as we see in various cases. Another case is Bindal Smelting. Here again, what the bank account which was attached was an over cash credit account, and it already had a debit entry of 6.42 crore. Now, what they wanted to attach, or what the provision allows, is the attachment of property. Property means it should have some cash or some value, but a debit account, I mean, where already a debit balance is there, it is an overdraft account. This will not serve any purpose, and therefore the order is per se illegal, and without having any, it does not serve, protect the interests of revenue, and the order was accordingly quashed, and it further prevents the assessee from continuing his business. Last in this case is the Amazonite Steel. Now here what had happened, there was an attachment order that for 1 year, 1 year expired, lapsed, and when the assessee approached the bank did not release. Assessee approached authorities also did not release, and instead issued second attachment order. So he approached Calcutta High Court challenging these proceedings. Calcutta High Court held that issuance of fresh order is not restricted, provided fresh order should also it should not be an extension of original order, but it should meet all the satisfaction, all the conditions prescribed under Section 83. And second, on the second point, what Calcutta High Court held, because this attachment orders were not served on the petitioner Amazonite, Kolkata High Court held that no, there is no requirement under the law to serve the order on the taxpayer. In our view, this is this part of the order is not correct, because as we have seen under Rule 159 that the taxpayer has 7 days to file objections. He is granted hearing, and thereafter Commissioner passes order in DRC 23. Now these proceedings cannot happen if the order is not even served on the taxpayer, and therefore to this extent the order of authority, the Calcutta High Court, is not correct. They have not addressed to this particular aspect. Also, this is contrary to one of the rulings that we discussed on this attachment, where that was a second round of proceeding before Gujarat High Court. In the first round, Gujarat High Court had directed the taxpayer to approach the authorities, file representation under Rule 159, and authorities were then required to pass order on that representation. Authorities did not, after that passing the order, the taxpayer then approached the Gujarat High Court in the second round. So this is an established position, but unfortunately, Calcutta High Court wrongly decided this particular position. So with this, we come to this audit seizure attachment is over. So I hand over to my colleague Ayush, who will take us through the various other topics. Over to you, Ayush.
Okay. Thank you, DK. Thank you for such great insight on the provisions. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining in such great number. For now, I'll be dealing with the various provisions related to show cause notice, appeals and recovery, and general penalty. DK, I request you to please control the slides. There is some technical issue from my side. Okay. So first of all, we move to the provisions regarding the show cause notice. So first of all, we need to know that why is it important for us to know the provisions of show cause notice. Our 3-year experience had been that the department had been issuing a summary show cause notice. So in the GST provision, there's a provision that show cause notice is required to be issued, and along with that, a summary show cause notice is required to be issued. But the department had been just issuing a summary show cause notice without giving a complete show cause notice. Second, if they issue even a complete show cause notice, such show cause notice is cryptic. It does not contain the required facts. It does not contain the relied upon documents. It does not contain the provisions and the findings. Therefore, the show cause notice which is issued under the GST had been seen to be very cryptic and does not contain in detail the allegations which has been raised by the department. Also, in the earlier regime, there was a show cause notice, there was a requirement for a pre-show cause notice consultation that has been continued under the GST also. But that show cause notice consultation has, the procedure for show cause notice consultation has not been followed by the authorities. These are the few aspects on which the show cause notice can be challenged at the time of these. On these grounds, a show cause notice can be challenged at the initial stage itself. If we do not challenge the show cause notice on these grounds at the initial stage itself, it becomes difficult to challenge at a subsequent stage. Therefore, it is important for us to know the complete procedure which is prescribed under the GST. And if the department does not follow the required procedure, then that can be a ground of challenge before the higher forum. So I'll explain in detail that what is the procedure prescribed under section 73 and 74 of the GST. So the relevant provisions which deals regarding the issuance of the show cause notice are section 73 and 74. 73 provides that the show cause notice can be issued if the tax is not paid, it is short paid, it is erroneously refunded, or ITC has been wrongly availed, or ITC has been wrongly utilized. So one thing to note here is that earlier the Senvet credit rule used to deal with the provisions regarding the recovery of the Senvet credit. Now that has been added to the substantive law, that is the GST Act itself. Now the show cause notice can be issued under section 73 and 74 for recovery of ITC as well. So what is the difference between the two provisions, section 73 and 74? 73 deals with normal period of limitation and 74 deals with the extended period of limitation. Now the question is, what is normal period and extended period? Normal period is where there is no fraud, willful misstatement or suppression of facts. Extended period are the cases where there is fraud, suppression and willful misstatement. All these acts are required to be coupled with intention to evade tax. So if any show cause notice is issued, the department beyond the normal period of limitation, the department has to prove in the show cause notice that there is fraud, suppression and willful misstatement. Unless these conditions are not proved with the intention to evade duty, the department cannot invoke the extended period of limitation. One more point to note is that earlier the extended period could also be invoked where there is contravention of the provisions. That has not been mentioned under section 74. Therefore, for contravention of the provisions, department cannot invoke the extended period of limitation. One more thing to note over here is that earlier the word separation was not defined under any of the act. It was a judicial interpretation which interpreted separation to mean where something is required to be disclosed but has not been disclosed, like we have seen in the cases of Triveni by the Allahabad High Court, where this provision was interpreted. Now, the word separation has been defined under the GST Act to mean non-declaration of fact or information which is required to be disclosed. Now, the department cannot allege that if some information is not required to be disclosed and we have not disclosed it, it amounts to suppression of fact. Suppression will amount only in those cases where some information is required to be disclosed and not has been disclosed and has not been disclosed by the SSC. So, not disclosed by the SSC. Moving on, the normal period of limitation provided under the Act is 3 years, and the extended period is provided 3 years, 5 years. In the earlier law, the normal period of limitation was just 2 years, and in the cases of excise and the service tax, it was 2.5 years. Now it has been extended to 3 years. Earlier, the normal period of limitation was linked to filing of monthly returns in the cases of excise, and it was linked to filing of 6 monthly returns in the cases of service tax. In the present regime, it has been linked to filing of annual return. So we can consider a few examples, like in the for the year 2017 and 18. The due date for filing of annual return was initially December 31st, 2018. It was extended to January 31, 2020. Since it was extended to January 31, 2020, the normal period of limitation also got extended to January 31st, 2023, and the extended period was extended up to January 31, 2025. For the year 18, 19, the normal period of limitation, like the upcoming normal date of filing annual return is September 30, 2020. If we calculate 3-year time period, the filing of the normal period of limitation will go up to September 30, 2023, and the extended period will go up to September 30, 2025. Similarly, for 1920 till now, the date of filing annual return is December 31st, 2020. The normal period of limitation will go up to December 31st, 2020, and the extended period will go up to 31 and 25. So if the date of annual return gets extended, at once it is beneficial for the SSC that they have to file the annual return belatedly, they get time to file the annual return. But the other side of the coin is that the department will get more and more time to issue the show cause notice and check the violations of the SSC, which initially would have expired in the year 2021, but now the same time period will expire in the year 2023. Moving on, the procedure which has been provided for issuance of the show cause notice is provided under Rule 142 of the CGST rules. Earlier, the requirement of a pre-show cause notice consultation was provided under the circular. That circular provided that only in cases where the amount in dispute is more than 50 lakh rupees, only in those cases pre-notice consultation is required to be issued. That provision has been changed and incorporated under the substantive rules itself, where pre-notice consultation is required to be issued in every cases. So if a show cause notice has to be issued, before that pre-notice consultation is mandatory, required to be conducted and issued, and if not, then that can be a ground of challenge before the higher forum. So before issuance of the show cause notice, there will be a pre-notice consultation that will be issued in DRC 01A. A reply will be filed in Part B of DRC 01. After the pre-notice consultation has been completed, then a show cause notice will be issued. Along with the show cause notice, a summary show cause notice will be issued. So earlier there was just one show cause notice which was issued, but now the requirement is there has to be a show cause notice and a summary of show cause notice. It had been seen that department had just been issuing the summary of show cause notice. That is not a valid document, and it is violation of the rules which has been prescribed. Therefore, the SSE can request for a detailed show cause notice in those cases. Now, the time period. Earlier, if the department issues department was required to issue the show cause notice in the normal or the extended period of limitation. Now, within the 3-year time frame, they are required to complete the adjudication proceedings as well. So in the 3-year time period, they are required to complete the adjudication proceedings. And before completion of the adjudication proceedings, before 3 months of the expiry of the normal period of before expiry of the normal period of limitation, they have to issue the show cause notice. And in case of extended period, they have to issue show cause notice before 6 months of expiring the 5-year time period. So they in the normal period, they have to complete the entire proceedings till adjudication in the 3-year time span, and for extended period, they have to complete the entire proceedings, that is from pre-SCN to adjudication order, in the 5-year time span. And that after issue of the show cause notice, reply will be filed. So that is the complete procedure. And after the filing of the reply to the show cause notice, there will be an order in original. So this is the complete adjudication procedure which has been prescribed under the GST Act. Moving on, now the question which may arise is that suppose there's an SSE which has filed a Tran 1 and transitioned the credit in the electronic credit ledger in terms of section 140 and has complied with all the regulations. Now, can department issue show cause notice under section 73 and 74 to recover the transitional credit? That is something which we are going to assess now. The words used in section 73 and 74 is show cause notice can be issued for recovery of input tax credit. Input tax credit has been defined as credit of input tax. What input tax has been defined is, input tax has been defined as tax of CGST, SGST, IGST, and UTGST. Therefore, in terms of 73 and 74, a show cause notice can only be issued for recovery of input tax credit. Input tax credit does not mean that it is transitional credit. So what we can see here, the definition of the input tax credit does not cover the transitional credit. Therefore, a no show cause notice under 73 and 74 can be issued for recovery of transitional credit. Another important point to notice that there's no provision under the GST Act which makes the SENVET credit equivalent to input tax credit. Also, there's a provision, Rule 121, which the department normally invokes for recovery of transitional credit. If we read the wordings of the Rule 121, it merely empowers the department to invoke section 73 and 74. It does not borrow the machinery provision for recovery of the transitional credit. So even if the show cause notice is issued for recovery of transitional credit, there is no machinery provision which is present for recovery of the transition credit. Therefore, no, if the credit has been transitioned from the earlier regime to the electronic credit ledger, there is no provision under which the department can issue a show cause notice and recover that credit from the SEC. There is a case of commercial steel engineering by the Patna High Court, where the issue was that the wordings used in that the SEC transition credit through Tran 1 to the electronic credit ledger. That credit, a show cause notice was issued for violation of rule section 140. So the issue before the High Court was whether this credit can be recovered in terms of section 73 and 74 or not. The High Court examined the provision and said that the section 73 and 74 uses the word availed or utilized. Transition credit is not availed by the SEC. It is transitioned through a Tran 1 form. It is not availed by a subsequent act. Also, the SEC was maintaining the minimum amount balance which they transitioned to transitional credit the entire time. Therefore, the credit was neither availed nor utilized by the SEC. Since the credit was not either availed nor neither utilized by the SEC, no recovery can be made under section 73 and 74. Therefore, our conclusion is that under section 73 and 74, there is no power to recover transitional credit from the SSE. Moving on with the appeals and recovery provision. First of all, we'll look into that why is it important for us to understand the appeal and recovery provision. Normally what happens is that when the SSE does not have a clear understanding of the appeals and recovery appeal provision, there's a time limit which is prescribed for filing of appeal. They normally miss the timeline, or when they do not are not in knowledge of the whole mechanism, they may file the appeal before the wrong forum, or there's a requirement of a pre-deposit, they might make an excess pre-deposit. Therefore, we are going to deal with the appeals provision. So after a show cause notice is issued and an order is passed, the appeal will lie either before the Commissioner Appeals or the Joint Commissioner Appeals. Now the difference between the earlier law and the present law is that earlier the appeal used to either lie before, considering the authority who has passed the order, the appeal will lie either before the Commissioner Appeals or the tribunal itself. But now there's a layer which has been added where all adjudication order will first necessarily be filed before Commissioner Appeals, and after Commissioner Appeals it will go to the tribunal. So so the time period which is prescribed for filing appeal before the Commissioner Appeals is 3-month period, and the Commissioner Appeals has 1 month has power to condone delay by 1 month. While filing the appeal, the SSE is required to make a deposit of 10%. Now the question arises, 10% of what? 10% of the disputed tax amount. So if the show cause, if the order is confirmed for 100 rupees tax and 100 rupees penalty, then the SSE is required to only deposit 10 rupees of the disputed tax and not of the 10% of the disputed penalty. And also if the appeal is only related to penalty and interest, then the SSE is not required to make any pre-deposit, because 10% pre-deposit is only of the disputed tax amount. Now, after the appeal is filed before the Joint Commissioner Appeals, the Commissioner Appeals has power to either confirm the demand or will set aside the order which has been passed by the adjudicating authority. Suppose the order is confirmed. Now the SSE has option. Now the SSE will look that where the appeal is required to be filed. Now the appeal will lie either before the National Tribunal or the State Tribunal. If one of the issues is related to place of supply, the appeal will go before the National Tribunal. If there's no issue regarding the place of supply, the appeal will go before the State Tribunal. While filing the appeal, the time limit which is prescribed is 3 months. And the national and the state bench has power to condone delay by 3 months. Earlier, by 3 months. Now, while filing an appeal, additional 20% pre-deposit is also required to be made. So this pre-deposit will be in addition to the 10% which has already been deposited. So, and while filing an appeal before tribunal, the total pre-deposit will be 30%. After now, suppose the tribunal passes an unfavorable order in against the SSE, the SSE from the state bench can directly file an appeal before the High Court. The time period for filing appeal is provided 180 days. After High Court, the person, if the order is still against the SSE, the SSE can move before the Supreme Court, and the time period provided is 60 days. And from the national bench, the appeal will directly go before the Supreme Court. One point to note is that till now the tribunal has not been formed. So the question may arise that what if there's an unfavorable order by the Commissioner of Appeals? Then in that case, a circular has been issued where the circular has said that the time period of 3 months of filing appeal will commence from the date on which the president of the tribunal enters their office. So either the SSE can wait till the time till the tribunal is formed, or they can do if there's a recovery which is pending against the SSE, they can directly approach the High Court under Article 226 and seek stay on the recovery which is going to be made by the department against the order which has been confirmed by the Commissioner of Appeals. Now, Section 121 provides the orders against which an appeal cannot be filed. Order directing transfer of proceedings from one officer to another. Officer staying demand of payment of demand in installments. order sanctioning prosecution, order for seizure or retention of books of accounts, register and other documents. In these cases, no appeal can be filed before the Commissioner Appeals Tribunal. But the SSC, if the order is not in favor of the SSC, they can directly challenge these orders before the High Court under the writ jurisdiction. Moving on with the recovery provision, the recovery provisions are contained under Section 78 and 79 of the CGST Act. Section 78 provides that the recovery can start 3 months from the date of the order, but it is to be looked at in cases where the right to appeal has not been exhausted. What will happen in those cases? Like if in the High Court the time period filing of appeal is 180 days. Suppose that time period is not exhausted. Can department come and recover the amount which has been confirmed by the tribunal? The answer will be no. But these provisions has not been tested in the court of law, and probably litigation will come up in this area as well. Now 79 provides the modes in which the department can recover tax from the SSC. The modes are deduction of money in control of the another officer, by detaining and selling the goods, and through arrears of land revenue, like it happens under the Code of Criminal Procedure. Now there's one new provision which has been added to CGST Act, that is payment installment. Suppose a demand has been confirmed against the SSC and they are unable to make the deposit at once. Now, in the earlier regime, there was a circular which was governing payment installments. Now, the same has been codified under Section 80. Now, the SSC can make a request to the commissioner for payment installments where they are unable to make the complete payment at one go. Moving on to the last section of our presentation, the last section will cover the general penalties. Now, in the earlier two webinars, we have already covered the portion of the penalties applicable under the different provisions. Here, we are just covering the portion of the general penalty. Now, the reason why we are covering over here is that that GST law provides multiple compliances required to be done by an SSC. Suppose a compliance has been undone or has not been done by the SSC, then in those cases, can a department go forward with a heavy penalty, or they are required to impose under just a minor penalty on the minor penalty on the SSC. In this regard, Section 125 of the CGST Act provides that penalty can be imposed for contravention of any provision of the CGST Act which is not specifically provided anywhere else. And the maximum penalty which has been provided is rupees 25,000. There was a decision by Madras High Court in the case of Caterpillar, where the issue was that goods were moving from one place to another, and that was detained by the department. The SSC generated the e-way bill, but on the date when the goods were detained, the e-way bill expired. So the e-way bill expired, and the issue before the High Court was that whether a penalty under 129(1) is required to be imposed. The penalty prescribed is equivalent to 100% tax, or a penalty under 125 is required to be imposed. So the Honorable High Court held that in cases where there is a mere procedural violation, where the SSC is unable to renew the e-way bill, then in those cases only a general penalty is required to be imposed, and not a penalty, 100% penalty, which is prescribed under Section 129(1). So the SSC can take benefit of these decisions where there's a minor procedural violation. Then only a minor penalty they can request for a minor penalty, and not for a substantive penalty which has been provided under the other provisions. With this, we come to an end to our webinar. Before this webinar, we conducted two other webinars. Both the videos, the complete videos of those webinars is available on our YouTube page. If anyone wants to have a look, they can visit our YouTube page and can access those videos from there. With this, we move to our question and answer round. So there are two modes through which a question can be asked. If anyone has any question, they can raise their hand, or either can mention their question in the chat box. we will unmute them, and then the question can be asked from us.
So is there any question? Then you may raise your hand and you can directly ask the question in the live Q&A round, or you could even post your question in the chat box. That also we can answer.
Yeah, see, my question is that in case there is an adverse order, the adjudication order, wherein the main notice, which is a company, is imposed with a penalty and certain demands are confirmed, and also there is a individual notice.
Hello?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Your voice broke in between. You said that in case there is an adverse adjudication order.
Correct.
Thereafter, we cannot hear you. Please.
Okay. Then, and in that order, on the main notice, there is a confirmation of penalty as well as the GST demand. And
Right.
in the same adjudication, there is also an individual notice, which is an employee of the company, on whom also there is a 25,000 rupees penalty confirmed.
Right.
These are the proceedings under section 74.
Okay.
Now, if the individual employee wants to close the matter, is it possible for him to pay the 50% within 50% of the penalty within 30 days, and the matter will get closed without any adverse impact on the main notice? That's the query.
In this case, no, because the main notice has to pay the tax, and only then the matter can be closed. The individual cannot pay 25% of penalty amount and close the matter.
Okay.
Yeah. So section 74.
I think it's 50% now.
Yes, it is 50%. So if you see 74(11), subsection 11 of section 74, where any person served with an order issued under subsection 9 pays the tax along with interest payable thereon under section 50 and a penalty equivalent to 50% of such tax within 30 days of communication of the order, all proceedings in respect of said notice shall be deemed to be concluded. And there is an explanation to this, where it says, explanation 2, where the notice under the same proceedings is issued to the main person liable to pay tax and some other persons, and such proceedings against the main person have been concluded under 73 or 74. The proceedings against all the persons liable to pay penalty under section 122, 125, 129 and 130 are deemed to be concluded. So the main proceedings against the main person need to be concluded, then other proceedings shall be deemed to be concluded. But it cannot so happen that the co-noticee only pays 50% of penalty and gets his matter closed. That's not possible.
Thank you.
Not prescribed anywhere. Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome. Any other questions? So we have a question from Mr. Parag Gupta. The question is, whether SCN can be issued for not filing of returns, that is 3B, since it is not a return according to section 39. See, now this question is not, 3B is not a return under 39 is no more relevant, because they've amended 61 retrospectively. So I think now this is not more, no more a relevant question. But yes, there are fines and penalties prescribed for non-filing and late filing of returns, and those will definitely be there. My request is that whosoever wants to ask a question, they have to raise hand. On your screen there is a raise hand icon. Just press that, and then we can unmute you, and then accordingly you can then uh, raise your query.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. So my query is like one-time relief was given for the dealers who have not filed returns for GST 1 and 3B from the period July 17 till January. So, but the same thing has not been done for the composition dealer. So, can we give any recommendation to the GST Council for the composite dealers relief?
I mean, see, this is entirely prerogative of the authorities. Definitely representation can be filed before GST authority and GST council that composition dealers who are very small dealers, they should be given extended this benefit. Definitely that recommendation can be representation can be filed.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Most welcome. So we do not have any queries, it seems. I think we would like to thank everyone. Thank you so much. I hope this series, our litigation series, has benefited everyone, and we look forward to your patronage again for our future sessions and future webinars that Nitya Tax Associates organizes. We thank you for your time and attending these sessions. Thank you very much. Please do feel free to reach out. Please feel free to reach out to you. Yeah, sorry, somebody is saying.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have one more question from Bala Subramaniam.
Yeah.
Bala Subramaniam, I have unmuted you. Request you to unmute yourself and please raise the question. Yes, Mr.
This notice issued for frequently section 46 for the non-filing of the return. Actually, we are taking the revision for the ISD registration. They're issuing a frequent notice non-filing of the return for the 3B return. That is what.
No, pre-SCN notice you have received for non-filing of
They're
ISD.
issuing the notice.
Hello? As I understand, you have received a pre-consultation notice, pre-SCN
from department.
Yes, for non-filing of ISD return. Yeah, you can file a reply
Yes, sir,
why you could not file and why it is not required to be filed, or whatever the reasons are. And
yes,
then if your reasons they consider, they may not issue show cause notice, but if they feel that no, the show cause notice is inevitable, then let them issue, and then that needs to be contested. Anyone? Mr. Mahadev Makkad also has raised his hand. We are unmuting you, sir. Please. You can unmute yourself and Mr. Mahadev Makkad. Are you there, Mr. Mahadev Makkad? So we have no further questions, it seems. We once again thank you, and thank you for your patronage and time and patience. Do provide your feedback, and do let us know, and keep a track on all our webinars from Nitya Tax Associates. Thank you so much. Thank you.